Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hello Word, the podcast where we explore the fascinating world of the English language, one word at a time. I'm your host, Alex, and today's word is colonial, a word that carries significant historical weight. Colonial is an adjective, and at a C1 level, it means related to colonies or colonialism. Think of it describing something originating from, characteristic of, or relating to a colony. We often hear it in discussions about history, politics, and cultural studies. So, how do we use colonial in everyday language? Well, it's often used to describe architecture, furniture, or even political systems that were prevalent during periods of colonization. For instance, you might hear someone talking about the beautiful colonial architecture in a certain city, or a historian discussing the colonial policies of a particular empire. It's a word that connects us to a specific time in history and helps us understand the legacy of colonization. Now, let's explore some synonyms for colonial. Words that share a similar meaning. One synonym is imperial. While imperial often refers more broadly to empires, it can sometimes be used interchangeably with colonial, especially when discussing the power dynamics involved. For example, instead of saying the colonial government, you could say the imperial government, although the nuance might shift slightly to emphasize the overarching empire rather than just the colony itself. Another synonym is provincial, but this is more accurate when talking about things from the point of view or within a colony, often implying a limited scope or outlook compared to the ruling country. We can say that the local attitudes were provincial due to limited exposure to the world. Another possible synonym is dependent, although this focuses more on the economic or political relationship of reliance. It's not a direct synonym, but captures an element of the colonial dynamic. The dependent territories relied heavily on the mother country. These synonyms, while similar, each have their own unique shade of meaning, so it's important to consider the context when choosing the best word. Let's move on to antonyms, words with the opposite meaning of colonial. This is where things get interesting, because the opposite of colonial depends on what aspect of the word we're focusing on. If we're talking about the power dynamic, an antonym could be independent. Independent signifies self-governance and freedom from external control, directly contrasting the subjugation inherent in the colonial relationship. For example, the nation achieved independent status after a long struggle. Another antonym could be metropolitan, referring to the major city or center of power, often the colonizing nation itself. So, while a building in a colony might be described as having colonial architecture, the corresponding style in the colonizing country might be described as metropolitan. For example, the metropolitan lifestyle was very different from the simple life in the colonies. Another antonym could be indigenous, representing the original inhabitants and their culture, which often stood in opposition to the colonial influence. We can say, they protected their indigenous traditions. Now, let's consider how colonial is used in everyday life. While it might not come up in every conversation, it's a crucial word for understanding historical context and discussing current events related to post-colonial societies. You might hear someone say, "That house has beautiful colonial-style windows," referring to a specific architectural design. Or you might encounter the term colonial mentality, which describes a mindset where people from formerly colonized countries still internalize the values and norms of the colonizers. In political discussions, people might refer to colonial legacies or the colonial past to explain current social or economic inequalities. Here are some more usage examples in sentences and phrases. The museum has a large collection of colonial artifacts. The professor specialized in colonial history. They were discussing the impact of colonial policies on the local population. The old city is famous for its well-preserved colonial buildings. The restaurant serves colonial-inspired cuisine. The colonial era left a lasting mark on the country's culture. The impact of colonial trade routes is still visible today. She researched the colonial administration's impact on education. Many countries are still dealing with the legacies of colonial rule. The architecture of the church reflected the colonial period. The effects of colonial rule are felt in post-colonial society. In conclusion, colonial is an adjective that refers to things related to colonies or colonialism. We explored synonyms like imperial, provincial, and dependent, and antonyms like independent, metropolitan, and indigenous. We saw how it's used in everyday language, from describing architecture to discussing historical events. Understanding the word colonial helps us to better grasp the complexities of history and its continuing impact on the world today. Thank you for joining me on Hello Word today. Before we wrap up, I have a small request. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a review. Your support helps others discover the show and learn new words. We are happy to keep providing you with top-quality education for free. As a final thought, I encourage you to create your own sentence using the word colonial and share it as a comment under this video. I'd love to see how you're using the word and get your perspective. Thank you again, and I'll see you in the next episode of Hello Word.